the book ends trying to summarize, look, when the shit hits the fan and some of these places are going to run into problems, and you and I have walked through some of the reasons why some of these places are going to run into problems. You have kicking obligations down the road. You have over relying on federal aid. That's a one-time thing. You might have your commercial tax base erode. Some people might be voting with their feet in various ways. So then shit starts getting dark. And then you have to make the big choice among the three options. And you lay out some of the principles for what one should do. So the three choices to review, good fun, is bailout, austerity, or default. And I'm going to just give you my personal outlook on this. Is that I remember when things were going bad, and I spent time in Detroit when they were declaring bankruptcy. They were doing some things where you're like, wow, it's rough. Like they have an art collection. And they had to sell it to try and meet their obligations. And at the last minute, one of the local philanthropists came in and bought it because they were about to have their art museum looted. I mean, it's pretty, and you could look at it and be like, well, art not so bad, but like there are other things. When you're in a rough time, it seems like firing more people is not the best move. You don't want to add fuel to a bad fire, so to speak. I totally understand the moral hazard issue because it's like everyone's just like, hey, let's just spend. And then anytime we get into trouble, it's like the bailout comes. And so it feels like the managed process of like a quasi bankruptcy default is like a middle of the road move. The problem then is that lenders get sad and say, you know what, I'm not going to give you guys as much as much money. Now, I like that. That strikes me as the least problematic, just in the sense that, there are a lot of problems why we have a hard time building, and I'm sure financing is one issue, but it doesn't strike me as the main issue. It seems like the main issue is around like the overregulation, the layers, the complexity, the capture, the corruption, probably, that's attendant. So anyway, those are my 2 cents on the big three of bailout, austerity, and default.
So, I mean, I think my preferences take two forms on this. I mean, so again, in the book, I think the situation will depend. So it'll depend a little bit which one you prefer. Totally. And so I don't give a single one answer to rule them all type of answer. But I think that what you can do is adopt balanced solutions, and then you can add conditions to some of your support that help avoid problems going forward. And so what do I mean by balanced solutions? So things like bankruptcy, but also things like giving federal aid to both states and cities at the same time, can result in a little default, a little austerity, and a little moral hazard. And that has the fact that they're small amounts rather than large amounts, there's kind of declining marginal harms. And so in the Detroit instance, as you know, the philanthropist came through, it was called the Grand Bargain. After bankruptcy, they came through with a bunch of money to support the art museum. But the state, which had been kind of holding out and not been super friendly to Detroit, also gave a lot of money in matching the philanthropist money. But they did it after bankruptcy had been declared, and the result was that it didn't create too much moral hazard, because who would want to go through bankruptcy just to get federal aid? That's crazy, or state aid. That's crazy. On the other hand, it mitigated the harms of the bankruptcy. So the pensioners just didn't do that badly between the philanthropist aid and the state aid. They would have done even better if the federal government had offered a little bit too, as President Obama wanted to do. And so this kind of balanced approach is attractive. The other thing I think is really attractive is that the federal government is going to give money. And realistically, it is given in the last two big crises, particularly during COVID, it gave an enormous amount of money. It should attach some conditions to that money in order to encourage states to do a little better. And so what do I mean? If the federal money had said, you can get this federal money, or you can get other streams of federal money. The federal government's giving states and cities money all the time. In return, though, you have to budget in accordance with GAAP, with generally accepted accounting principles, or you have to accept what Connecticut put into its bond, a covenant into its bonds, which are a volatility cap. They put a couple covenants, but one was which is that if you're getting a one-time amount of money, you have to save a certain percentage of it. And the conditionality can help you avoid the problems going forward. So take advantage of the fact that you're doing something you'd rather not do, which is this aid, in return to get some conditionality. And so that has two nice effects. One is that the conditions hopefully are good themselves, but secondly, the conditions are painful. And so it makes taking aid less pleasant than it might otherwise be. It's not a free lunch. And so one of the things, so the federal aid during COVID to states and cities was almost certainly too large. It was, it certainly has helped to kick off inflation.
They took a fire hose out. They just went, and I got it.
And,
now, you were saying, hey, at least it could have been a conditional fire hose.
It could have been conditional, and it probably should have been, less of a fire hose and more of a super soaker. But, whatever. But one of the interesting things is that one of the reasons it was so big was because they were trying to avoid the moral hazard problems. Because they give it to every place. But not every place had a fiscal problem, but they just gave money to everybody. And that helps reduce moral hazard because you're not rewarding a jurisdiction
bad
for
behavior.
being...
You're just
right.
like, you exist, here you go.
But you are just splashing out the cash. So those are the principles, which is, I think they should attempt, the federal government, when it's facing one of these crises, you're going to make a bad choice. It's going to be a choice that's painful. But you can build things into it to make it a balanced bad choice, that is to say, just a little bad across a number of dimensions, and you can use it to create situations such that we are we're less likely to see these problems going forward.